Must the EU constantly expand its borders and influence? Can it not just stay put? It's a complex interplay between what far-off nation-states wish to do and Euro ambitions, the centre and the periphery, and the relationship between the two. But the periphery is in constant motion. Join me, Jan Darasz, for how we got here.
The European Union's commitment to the Western Balkans was solidified with the launch of the Stabilization and Association Process in 1999. This strategic framework supports the gradual rapprochement of the Western Balkan countries with the EU through various means such as financial assistance and regional cooperation. Croatia's accession to the EU on July 1, 2013 marked a significant milestone, being the first of the 7 Western Balkan countries to join the bloc. It was possible due to the country's immense effort in implementing required reforms. Remaining countries such as Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Montenegro, North Macedonia and Serbia have been granted candidate statuses. Notably, accession negotiations had been previously opened with Montenegro and Serbia. As of July 2022, negotiations with Albania and North Macedonia were also initiated. The EU has developed several instruments to facilitate this integration process and to establish free trade areas fostering political and economic cooperation. They also create permanent cooperation structures, ensuring a structured dialogue between the Western Balkan parliaments and the European Parliament. The road for EU, however, has been challenging for Balkans.
So the additional set of problems for the Western Balkan countries in terms of Europe, the United States and beyond is that, in a sense, they're in competition with a lot of issues that need to be resolved and a lot of crises that could very quickly escalate.
The EU strategy for the Western Balkans, reaffirmed in the Commission's February 2018 document and subsequent EU Western Balkan summits, continues to offer a European perspective to the region. The journey ahead for the Western Balkan countries, however, is paved with challenges.
My guest today is Tomasz Żornaczuk, who is the coordinator for the Central Europe programme at the Polish Institute of International Affairs. Welcome to the programme. Great to have you.
Thank you.
Let's start off with the Balkans first and EU expansion or accession. Is it within our short-term thinking that the Balkans, the Western Balkans, the Balkans in general, will become members of the EU? Is there a time frame on that?
Sadly not. We would like to have a time frame for that, but the policy itself, the enlargement policy towards the Western Balkans, is going on well over 2 decades now. It goes back to 2000, the summit in Zagreb, where the countries, the member states, for the first time mentioned the Western Balkans as the countries that can join the EU in the future, something that was confirmed in Thessaloniki in 2003. So we have 21 years now that the process is going on in the Western Balkans. Croatia was part of it, and that's the only country that so far joined the Union in 2013. 6 remaining countries are on the way, on very different stage of accession. Sadly, most of them at the beginning stage of the accession.
How do you account for that time? Is that a long time in the EU framework? Why is it taking so long?
Whether it is long or short, you have to compare to something. So we can compare it to either Croatia, that was within the package, or, for example, to Poland, that was going through this process in late 90s, beginning of 2000s, right? So for Croatia, it took roughly 6 years, not even 6, to complete the talks, and then to go through the referendum and join the Union that took 2 additional years. When we look at the most advanced country among the 6 remaining aspiring member states or candidate countries from the Balkans, Montenegro is been negotiating now for 14 years. It's been 15th year for Montenegro. They started in 2010, actually, where the decision was. So the real negotiation is from 2012. It's over a decade, something that is way longer than to Croatia to go through the process from the very beginning to the end. Serbia is the only country that is that far advanced, but the results are very modest for now. And we then have countries like Macedonia, North Macedonia, Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Kosovo that are at the very beginning stage of the accessions, meaning that the prospects are not very much visible, sadly.
What can you negotiate actually on in concrete terms for decades?
Well,
you talked. Sorry to interrupt. You talked about the values of Europe, accepting the norms of European liberal democracy. Is that what countries such as the countries of the Western Balkans actually are discussing, or have they already accepted these basic premises?
The very basic ones are a condition to start the negotiations or to think of the European integration with the EU. That are so-called Copenhagen criteria, which are composed of human rights and other values that you mentioned: free market, democracy, rule of law. But otherwise, the negotiation framework is composed of what is now 6 clusters, and in the past was 35 chapters. And these 35 chapters, in fact it's 33 because 2 remaining ones are very technical issues in most cases. So those chapters in the past, or clusters today, they cover something that can be called simply acquis communautaire, that is the legal framework of the European Union. And it goes from anything like fishery, competitions law, through human rights, minority rights, to foreign policy and other issues, monetary policy, etc., etc. So there is roughly 30 fields in which a candidate country has to ally its own laws with the European Union's one. That's basically what the negotiations are. In fact, today it is more about complying with those laws rather than negotiating, as it was the case of Poland. If we remember Prime Minister Miller, who was indeed negotiating in Copenhagen in the very last moment, the milk quotas and all those stuff, that's the past, that's gone, it's not there anymore.
And moving further afield now, Turkey is also mentioned as almost a perennial negotiating partner about EU accession, but still it seems to be far off. Moving even further east is Georgia and countries of the Black Sea, Ukraine, Georgia. Is there a time frame by which you can imagine Europe expanding into there, or is it just a figment of the imagination?
No, the simple answer is no, but that's a very interesting question, because Turkey and Georgia are completely 2 different stories in terms of European integration. Turkey's history of European integration goes back to the 60s, whereas in first decade of 2000s, 2005-6, they started the EU negotiations. They started official talks with the EU on membership, something that was very quickly frozen for different reasons by Austria, Cyprus, later Cyprus, and Greece, for many different reasons. Turkey, and I'll be short on it, we can simplify it that Turkey is out of the process for the moment. It wasn't mentioned in the recent communiqué by the European Commission. The latest Council didn't mention Turkey either. This is due to the internal developments in Turkey, and in fact very weak at best or no progress in such domains as human rights, freedom of speech, democracy, rule of law in general. That's on Turkey, whereas Georgia is a very new story. Georgia applied immediately after Ukraine applied on the 28th of February 2022. Sometime later, weeks later, Georgia and Moldova applied together. Georgia was first given a perspective or prospects to join, meaning that they were not given a candidate status, unlike Ukraine and Moldova at that time, and I'm speaking about June 2022, but later on they catch up. So Georgia is a very new country in the negotiations at the very beginning of the process, and the prospects are there on the horizon, but nobody can tell the time frame for that.
The European EC Vice President noted about Poland's accession. Poland not only opened a new gateway to the east, but also made Europe more self-confident. So the eastward march seems to have very definite limits in terms of who can want to join the EU.
That's
Ukraine, for example, has an ongoing border war with Russia, and yet the European Union has dangled the carrot of EU membership for it.
Oh, not only that, but we have a country within the EU that, according to its constitution, doesn't control full territory, and we speak about the Cyprus, of course.
Yes.
So this doesn't disqualify Ukraine from the talks with the EU. We have a precedent on that. We have also maybe a bit less complex situation with Serbia and Kosovo, with the previous not recognizing the other as an independent state, but rather as a part of its own country. So that wouldn't be a serious argument in the discussion. Actually, again, the limits are very precisely written in the treaties, and they say simply that any European country that shares values with those of the EU can apply for membership. For this very reason, Morocco, for example, in late 80s, who applied for membership, was not given a chance to start negotiations because they didn't fulfill the condition of being a geographically European country.
Maybe a bit of a provocative question, but is the EU an empire in the sense of, for example, the Habsburg Empire, we have a centralized bureaucracy, centralized authority, and a periphery of nation states around it?
Yeah, that's only part of it, because subsidiarity rule gives some powers in the very center of the EU, but it also remains many powers in the nation states simply, also on the local level. Empire is something that is built around one, at best two countries, and it's usually rebuilt. Its raison d'être, its reason to exist, is to expand by force, something that we cannot say about the EU.
Does the EU have within its present structure the seeds of its own dissolution, in a sense? We've seen Brexit, for example, 2016. There are many much discontent with the current setup of the EU. Do all these unions have within themselves their kind of seeds of destruction, to put it dramatically?
Each country has the right to live. That's also one of the articles of the treaty. We see from the polls that the Brits deeply regret the decision. Most of the Brits at the moment are for joining back the Union, something that we cannot exclude in the future.
Right. That's all we have time for. So thank you very much, Tomasz Żornaczuk, for coming onto our programme.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Great pleasure. That's all we have time for. Join me next time for How We Got Here.